Welcome to the Conscious Hustler podcast. I'm your host, Tiffany Hardin. I know being a leader takes stamina and constant self-reflection. In my double-decade career, I've gone from intern to CEO, launching hundreds of creator campaigns for Fortune 500 brands and building new businesses for creators to grow and scale. Along the way, I have met some of the most interesting people working behind the scenes who have pursued excellence in work and embraced personal growth as mindful leaders. This podcast is dedicated to lifting the veil on successful creative professionals, their mindset, their motivation, and their heart posture. Together in each episode, we will explore the tools you need to not only thrive in your business, but also nurture your soul. My intention is to help you confidently own your work and affirm your experience. If you like what you hear, don't forget to share this podcast episode with a friend, with a neighbor, with a coworker, and subscribe to our channel. Okay, let's get started. All right, let's get into it. I want to introduce you all to Macala Rose. Macala is a dear friend. We were fast friends. She's a behavioral analyst and researcher who works and specializes in analytics, strategy, and research. Also, this is one of my fun facts about Macala. She is the founder of a horse ranch that helps people of color better manage their mental health. How about that? Okay. So in this episode, we are going to talk about the challenges that people of color face in mainstream wellness practices. We're also going to dive into Macala's her domain expertise, because more than anything, she knows what we need as creatives to ensure that the stories we tell and the data that comes behind it really takes a precedence in how we build our companies. So I'm excited to talk to Macala, excited to bring her in here because she got the juice for us. Okay. I know there's a bunch of things that I've probably missed, but I wanted to put my own little spin on your bio. But feel free to fill in the blanks and tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Well, I think you hit it on the head, my love, is that you've actually said I'm a woman who lives at the intersection of my interests. And really that lies in behavioral analysis, data and analytics across any type of business. And, you and I kicked it off by working on how can creators and influencers better analyze their results for the people that they work for, as well as themselves to grow, because we want to see more creators of color getting their fair share of that paper.
I know that's right.
Yeah. And on the ranch side, yeah. So I am also the founder of Rose Ranch in Bellingham, Washington, where I specialize in mental health and inner well-being for people of color. And we use horses to do that work.
What gave you the idea to get into that work? Because most of us, when we think of our wellness practices, we're like, okay, I went for my walk, I breathed really well. And, where does horses come into play there? And how did you get into that?
Absolutely. So I grew up with a love of horses and riding. I actually was born in a small town in Iowa, and my grandparents were fifth generation farmers, immigrants, everything like that. And, my mom moved us to the city, like Chi-Town, when she was just kind of done with that farm life. But I kept always coming back to horses. I'd go out to the barn on the weekends and ride, everything like that. But so horses have always been really important to me. I've done all the disciplines. I was competitive. But, later on in life, I had two very bad riding accidents, nearly broke my back and was unconscious for a couple days. It was pretty crazy. And with COVID, I'd stopped riding for a while, but with COVID, I decided, you know what, it's time to start making some shifts in my own mental well-being. And it led to 4 years of new education and certifications and learning to navigate my own mental health and just not being burnt out, depressed, tired, damn near catatonic. And the horses were a part of that. I mean, we couldn't go anywhere. We were locked down. I had a friend with a pasture, so I bought 2 horses off Facebook and started this journey. Yeah. And what I've come to learn.
Shout out to Facebook Market.
Girl, you can get anything on Facebook. Mm-hmm. But with what I started to see, as I started to kind of build programs and services was that two types of people were coming to me. First, they were clinicians themselves, so nurses, psychotherapists, and people that worked in a clinical medical setting, whether it was mental or physical, and they were just burnt out. They just wanted to be around the animals. They wanted to help me out and volunteer because, while they supported patients and then the organizations they work for, there was no one supporting them. So we formed our own little group called HHPF, which was Horses and Holistic Practitioners and Facilitators. And so we would start meeting monthly at the barn. And then I started realizing that women of color that I started interacting with and doing some work with just in terms of digital inner well-being didn't understand that like they could have access to horses. They were fascinated by them. So I started inviting them out to the ranch and being to do sessions in person there. And it kind of was this culmination. I think I texted you this morning. I'm like, well, 3 days ago, God showed me what I was supposed to do. So Rose Ranch is dedicated to the mental health of women of color, whether they are a client of ours or they are an actual practitioner or facilitator themselves. And just the ability, I think, to be outside in nature and nature therapy and being around very safe, kind animals that can read just about every emotion you're experiencing is really polarizing for some people. And the horse and the environment do a lot of that work for them. And so, that's my solution to making health, mental health and inner well-being more accessible and inclusive is that, this is our ranch is a safe space.
Yeah.
That's where you can come for whatever you need. I have partners that are psychotherapists and other types of practitioners, but that's what we're building, and we're even going to build. I'm going to announce it today, but I'm building my own training program for women of color that are therapists that use horses in their work, so that we can have a better trauma informed, culturally relevant approach to mental health for women. So that
Wow.
was a lot in there, but that's
Wow.
like my calling for these horses and everything we do. And just, I realized that this was the need. And so it's going to take some time to grow, but that
You
is
know
what
what?
we're doing.
I
What's
really
that?
I love hearing this, because it's so when I was younger, I used to live in Dallas, Texas. My mom got us horseback riding lessons out in
Yeah.
Lancaster, which is like an hour and some change out. But
Yeah.
she specifically went to Lancaster because it was a black owned business, and so we were able. So my first interaction with horses was with a rancher who was black. We had to clean the horses, we had to do the hooves and all the things. But I also had an experience when I was younger where I fell off a horse at a horse show, and I didn't know how to gallop yet, and so my horse Smokey like took off, and I was like losing it, like riding down this road, and I eventually fell off into barbed wire, and it was a scary experience. But when I tell you guys,
Mhm.
like I got the blood of Jesus, honey. Like there was not a scratch on my body, even though my helmet was tore up, my shirt was tore up. But it took me a minute to like get back engaged with
Mhm.
horses. And maybe like a year or some change ago, I live in Tennessee now, and
Yeah.
um, I went out to go ride horses with a friend, and it was very peaceful. And there is a like what is it called, like a telepathic connection between the horse and myself. And it was so interesting because I was, even when there was an opportunity for all the horses to like run through this pasture and like
Mhm.
gallop through the pasture, and people were like, yeah, let's do that. I was personally nervous, and my horse didn't. Like it could have, because it can do whatever everybody else is doing. My horse just did a nice little trot, and I was like, I
Mhm.
didn't tell you, but I'm glad you did it. Like,
Yeah.
but maybe I did tell you. There is
Yeah.
something you know, to your point about these peaceful animals. It's like everything is about energy. And I'm personally just curious about, you know, what about your career trajectory got you
Sure.
to this place where you're like, you know what? This is the chief thing that matters, and I want other people to experience that. What has existed in your career? Maybe take us down the rabbit hole?
I think it's a really interesting question for this state that I'm in now. And I think that, it goes back to like as a woman who's in her early 40s, I think I've just gotten to the place in the last year, 2024, where all the previous versions of myself and all these experiences are kind of coming into um, just a unique mix. So on the data and analytics side, that I was fashion, I've worked in hip hop, I was in entertainment, I've worked on things for Universal Pictures, 20th Century Fox. And I said, 4 years ago, I left Hollywood and hip hop for horseback. And the funny thing is now is it's come very full circle where I'm now doing analysis because I love data. Girl, I say I eat Google for breakfast, but I love analytics. I love looking at behavioral patterns. But on the flip, I still have the whole thing that's happening in the real world with our ranch. So I think that what I've learned in all these versions of myself and all my careers is that there comes a point when you've also done a lot of inner work where all the best pieces of every life, every intersection can come together and make something entirely new, even though it's based on everything you've already done. And I don't think that we are supposed to have just one thing. I think there are things that can be more dominant, but it's all those little branches that add into the foundation of that, just like the strong root, the trunk of a tree. So, there's stuff that I've learned in working with, high profile, high energy personality in entertainment that I now you learn the learnings of that. You bring it into the setting with someone who has that same high energy, kind of high anxiety, always going. You put them next to a horse, and I now know how to help them decompress pretty quickly.
That's amazing.
So I never thought that. Oh, I learned this marketing tactic over here in Hollywood. I learned this from doing live hip hop events, and then I learned this on the back of a horse in the crappiest weather in the rain. Would make up every essence of my being. So while it's not completely easily defined, I think that in learning, it's like I do sit at the intersection of my interests. They're just
How do
very
you,
specific now.
yeah,
And I love that.
so I want to talk about that a little bit because
Okay.
I feel like people, especially in today's age and coming
Hmm.
up, like we are millennials. And so we
Yeah.
get it was like our parents that
Hmm.
had to feel like they had to be very specific and do this one thing, stay in that job for 1,000 years, climb the ladder. And
Yeah.
then here we come with the internet and,
Yep.
social media and everything else to say, actually, from 20 to 24, I'm this person and I'm doing these things. From
Hmm.
25 to 35, I'm doing this other thing.
Hmm.
How do you fight the desire of people to say, you have this fragmented focus and nobody knows how to define you, and say, have the strength and the courage to be like, that's none of my business. Like, this is what I'm doing and this is what I want.
Oh, I hear what you're asking. So I think that, as we're on, like, whether you want to talk about your business or your personal life, we're always on a journey. It's always evolution of self. In both the business self, the personal self, sometimes they cross over, sometimes they don't. Some people like to compartmentalize all those lives, right? And that's perfectly okay. So, I know we're always told to have like niche down, have the one thing and the one audience. Girl, the day I decided to be a generalist and use like the things I love, data, analytics, web optimization and SEO, my world changed and I don't have a specific industry. So becoming nicheless and honing the strongest skills I had really helped me uh, it built a container for evolution because
Mm.
that's what I see in anyone, whether they're a creator, whether they're a business person. And I think that mainstream messaging about niching and scale, I'm like, what about sustainable? Because with if you build a container that is flexible within your personal or business goals, you can evolve with it. That way you're not always burning it down and starting from the ground. And I've come to find, because I did studied over like 1,000 hours of like YouTube, big YouTubers with huge communities, lots of comments. There's a certain percentage of your audience that is always going to stay with you and evolve with you as you change topic, change platform, go dormant for a year if you're burnt out and need some time away. So I always encourage people. It's like, you know what? Maybe you start with the one thing because that just is a little bit of an easier focus instead of doing like four or five. But in the end, if you have two or three things and they exist in tandem with each other somehow, don't feel like you have to be so easily defined, because masters, and I mean, these are just some of the most, and I don't mean, some are rich, some are just have very rich lives of friends and family, but they've kind of defined what life means to them. And so by not being nicheless or harder to define, they still have a very viable business, a very rich life in terms of friends, family, story, and also just do well financially. So this linear, you putting yourself into a box, I don't do that anymore. It's when I broke all that down that I was like, wow, my life is, I live life according to me. The people that are supposed to be here find me or I find them, and we let those relationships build. So I think we have to give ourselves permission to drop the narrative that we're supposed to be or do one thing, and that the version of ourselves at 25 needs to then progress to what 30 should look like. Because you know what? Maybe you're 25 working in a job, you love it, but then by 30, you're like, yo, I need to go van life and just go find myself somewhere. And you do that.
Yeah,
I'm not afraid to make a hard pivot. Like
I love
as
that.
long as I'm not going to endanger someone, like physically, emotionally, financially, because I've changed my company. But you know what I did for my employees? I gave them wide berth. I said, "Yo, I'm going to do this. We're going to go here. Do you want to evolve your role and kind of take some of this or that, or do we need to work on maybe transitioning you down or out?" And then if it was down and out, I always help them find another position. So I do give care to my pivots, especially if they are more drastic and they impact someone. But if they don't impact anybody but me, girl, I'll change tomorrow.
I know that's right. You're like,
And be
find
like,
me
Lord
a
Jesus, please make sure I'm not too crazy, but here I go.
I love that. I love that you give yourself permission to edit, and
Yeah,
you're constantly reflecting on, well, what's working and like what are parts of myself that actually need to come to the surface so that
yeah,
I'm not busy either suppressing or self-betraying in the process. And you spoke to leadership, which, part of this too, and being a conscious hustler is
yes,
also acknowledging like there's an aspect to this that is leadership, not just for yourself, but those
yes,
around you. It's my experience that, when I grow, everybody else around me uh,
yes.
grows and gets the benefit of that growth and gets the benefit of that
Mhm.
knowledge. And so, can you talk to me about, the difference that you've seen in how you lead versus how you've been led over time and like what you took and then what you left behind?
Oh, for sure. Like, I think you and I had a conversation last year about like working for some of those entertainment execs that were the screamers. And it's like, you thought, I mean, girl, you were just like, you were proud if you didn't get yelled at that day.
Yeah.
Or like if you were able to kind of take some of that hard, really strong, energetically charged negative behavior because they didn't really know how to lead or to communicate and not have a breakdown. Like I came up during the time where like it was okay to scream and yell, and you wore it as a badge of honor that you could stick it out. So
Right,
that's
you're
something
just,
that,
like, weaving through, it's like, I hear the yelling coming this way, I'm just gonna, like,
yep,
"Okay, that's the
yep.
message? Okay, I'm gonna take that," and then go on.
Yeah, I and just to think that that's how the world, like that's how I always thought business worked, was dysfunctional and yelling executives. And I started to realize, I'm like, yeah, it's not like, then there were like, I got like one or two super nice people. You're like, oh, that's nice. Oh, you kind. Oh, I think I like this better. So as once I transitioned out of being in house and started to build my own thing, I was always very cognizant of how I treat, and I am to this day, how I work with my people. Now, I don't hold on too long if something just doesn't work, but I will always make my best effort to clearly communicate with them, because we all have lives, right? We all have things that we people don't know about. Sometimes someone might be suffering mentally. There might have been a death in the family. So if
Mm,
I notice something isn't being met, like in terms of performance and deliverables, I'll go talk to that person. I usually go about 3 rounds before I say, "Hey, we got to make a transition out because this just doesn't get better." But always believe that kindness, empathy, and grace is how I approach any conversation these days. And if someone can't meet me with that back, whether it's a client or an employee, then I really have to assess whether that's something that should continue or not, because I don't believe that being a, egomaniac that drives people in fear and causes stress responses in their minds and bodies is okay. And there's still a lot of that today. So I do my best within my parameter to treat people the way I wanna be treated, if not better, because sometimes I'm not treated that great, but I'm still gonna meet them with loving kindness, because maybe someday down the line, they'll realize that, "Hey, you know what? Even though I was going through a thing at that minute, she never came down on me for it." And, it's Maya Angelou that said, it was not Tupac, y'all, that said, "Remember, people will forget what you did for them, but they will always remember how you made them feel."
Oh yeah.
And is that's just it. So I'm like, are the words about to come out of my mouth in this, what is gonna be the long-term impact on someone for that? And I often don't say things. So that's my idea of leadership is, and it may take a lot of strength sometimes to do it, but we have no right to treat someone poorly. And if we can't communicate and there's just continual disruption, then you just end the relationship in the best possible manner. Even
Right.
though sometimes, yeah, you wanna just have a complete meltdown and go sideways with it, it never ends in
It
your
never ends
favor.
well. And I know that like
Yeah,
in those environments too, especially for our folks that are in corporate culture, like it can that tension exists and sometimes it's really hard to alleviate that. Especially if there's power dynamics at play,
yeah.
gaslighting at play, etc. And you know, a lot of people end up, especially people of color and women of color,
Oh god, yeah.
we end up leaving environments, not because we weren't necessarily strong enough to communicate, but because the impact of that communication, that reception of that perception of that,
Yeah,
um, doesn't often create safety for us. And so we are like, you know what, matter of fact, I'll do my own thing. I'll get a new job, or I'll
yeah.
figure my own way out. And um, sometimes that even leads us to some glass cliffs. But, you know,
Mhm.
I really think this is where the retreat comes in that you have,
Yeah,
because these types of things are hard to articulate when you're like, and it's really called work trauma. It's like
yes,
the
it
work
is.
trauma that people bring
Yes.
into, you know, or leave with them and bring into potentially the next environment. It's no
Yeah.
different than any other relationship that you may have. If you were dissed by a friend or a lover, and you
Mhm.
meet someone new, and there's something that your spidey senses are tingly about because you didn't really resolve the last thing, you know, this is all a part of being conscious, to be honest with you, is
Yeah,
really thinking about what are my own triggers, what does that mean in my life, and how am I moving through them, so that when something does trigger me, because we live in the world, like
yeah.
there's even the ambient environment that we live in, that can even be triggering to some degree,
Mhm.
i.e. elections and politics, but like,
Yes.
how do we deal with our own stuff? So my next question for you is, when because I feel like we're at the space in our lives where we are the sage, right? We're the
Yeah.
teachers.
Yeah.
So when you're dealing with and talking to those folks that are emerging in their careers, and they are trying to figure out how are they going to, tell their boss or their peer, you know,
Mhm.
something that is bothering them in a work relationship, what's your advice for being able to confront someone,
Yeah.
and getting a result out of that? Or are we just getting things off our chest because it just hurts us? When do we figure out when to do it and when not to do it?
Alright, so I'm gonna answer this from the perspective of a person of color who's had to do this herself, both in the "I work for someone" phase and in the "this was a client of mine" phase.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start by first validating the experience that a person of color is having in a potentially hostile work environment or work setting. It is not okay. it is not your fault. And let's start there with, if someone is trying to gaslight you or put it on you that, oh, this is more about you, which is what we all see as people of color, right? That archetype of the angry black man, woman, whatever. No, and that is not acceptable. That's a microaggression, and that's racism. Let's be real clear about all that. And I had to learn that from my own, like, work. I hired a trauma coach and an anti-racism coach named Amrit Singh, who I work with regularly, because I didn't realize that that was in fact what was happening to me, and it really broke me down. And so the first thing is again validating your own experience and saying, yes, this is my experience and it is okay. And no, you don't go meditate and process off any emotion trying to be happy. I mean, the realization in itself can be a very difficult thing to deal with. And from that, I think it's about self-assessment of the situation. Like, where does it lie? Like, if we're going to keep in the context of work, right? Is there someone in the organization that you can speak to about the behavior of the people? Is it safe to go to HR to lodge a complaint if it's a bigger organization? Some places you can do that. Some places you can't, sadly, because that's just the state of the workplace. And in my first job, I went to a trusted VP in another division and I said, hey, I am experiencing this from this woman and this is really hard on me. And, this was luckily a very nice man. He went and tried to navigate it with that VP's boss. And in the end, I call it, they counted the coup, because once that complaint was in to him and then her boss went to address it, because I wasn't the only one that she kind of would throw the baby out with the bathwater with. She'd made sure you got off her team real quick, because that was just it. So I ended up, even though I thought I'd done it in a really good way, I was fired. And that was just it. Like, I mean, it was kind of funny because 6 months later, the VP that I'd gone to said, why don't you come work in my division and I'll just keep you away from her. And really the issue wasn't me. I always delivered above and beyond. It was, she just had perceived threats of other women on her team. This was not about color at the time, I don't think. She didn't strike me as that. But I lost my job because of it, because I tried to vocalize, this is very traumatic. And I even didn't go to work for a week. And I tried to put things in place to help me and it backfired. Second time I had to navigate that, I did my best to bring it to light. It worked kind of okay. But once certain behaviors were brought up to the people in that second instance, they made working with them even harder. And so in the end, what I did was I played ball. I kept doing my deliverables. But when I finally had the ability, I call it walking out the back door, I left, because but I did it with grace and kindness. I didn't point
Yeah.
fingers. I didn't have a tantrum. I took the higher road, even though it was hard at the time, because
Yeah.
I was angry. I was frustrated, and I had every right to be, because I'm like, I do good work. Girl, I do data. I know how much I do. I can prove it in the numbers and the money I make them. So,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, Macala's not. I'm like, y'all see
Right.
that 6 figures on there? Oh,
Yeah.
Macala is. But you can't go to that level. So I just said, okay, can I keep living this way and working this way? No. Okay, what steps do I need to take to start getting myself out of this? Because not everyone has the privileges of just going to quit a job or quit a
Right.
client, right? Especially if you've got mouths to feed, your
Right.
own, your family, whatever. So, it's sometimes, for that second client that I let go of, it took me a year to replace it, but I did it, and was very, very stealth strategic about it. But and the funny thing is they recently came back and said, can you come back? We're really sorry. And I was like, no.
Exactly. And
And
sometimes
it was,
it's people in the
yeah.
organization too, where it's like, is this person still there? Okay, then, so
Yeah. And that
sometimes,
was it. It's like, oh yeah, they're all three here. Then the answer is no.
yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
care. No. And
Well, what
and
did
so
you,
it was a process of, just getting fired. But also then in the end at both of those endings, I was like, you know what, Macala, this is sad. You can move forward from this. And this was not you. I think that's always the biggest takeaway, is that don't believe the mind trash that because your brain's wired for story. We always use story to make meaning of things that happen. And don't spin some false narrative of, oh, this was probably my fault. No, it wasn't. Because racism can be overt, but it can also be very covert. That's what and micro. And a lot I don't think a lot of people realize that. So in the end, if you've got the ability to make the steps to go out, getting a new job, looking for something else, silently talking to your network, that's what you do. And in the case where I ended the relationship with that client, I just said, look, our workload is so big, I can no longer meet your needs. I didn't say things about the people, making that very, very hard and very hostile and uncomfortable. So that's, high road. It's hard, but it works. And then I think just the way you speak to yourself in processing it in the time that it's happening and after, you always also give yourself the space to process that over weeks, months, or even maybe up to a year, because depending on how severe that dynamic was, because again, it probably has resulted in some form of trauma to you in your brain, and your body has to learn to recalibrate from not being in this state of fear or flight, as they call it. Okay, I'm gonna stop there, girl. I
This
keep
is powerful. This is dropping those gems. Like, this is really
going.
powerful, and I'm really excited for people to listen in on this. We're gonna round out the episode here, but
Yeah.
it's really powerful to talk about this because one of the things, especially young executives and all of us tend to do, is try to make meaning of the story that we're telling ourselves,
Yes.
right? Well,
Yes.
it's because I'm not this enough or that enough, and it is a trap and it is mind trash. And I think, I'm excited for people to hear this because there is also this little voice that sometimes gets like pummeled on by our negative self-talk that does say like, no girl, like you're good here. And it definitely takes a courage and to not internalize the external environment.
Yep.
We can't
Yep.
internalize our external environment. We have to, really dig in and, define for ourselves what our worth is and
Yes.
with whom we want to share that with. So I love this story and I love that you have these like real life anecdotes both on the client side of things and also earlier in your career. And listen, you're a bad mama jamma. She's out here doing all the big data and analytics for some major corporations, and homegirl got a ranch. Okay, so I can't wait to come and be
Girl,
on
I
that.
think every woman of color needs a horse, okay?
We need
I
her.
mean, did you see Snoop today talking like he was watching Dressage with Kevin Hart? He's like, "You can teach horses to crit walk? Whoa!" Like it was hilarious. We gotta get him in the video. Like, I think every industry should have any industry, whether it's a company, whether it's an individual person, it's an industry. We all deserve representation because it's just going to make everything so much more unique
Oh yeah.
on that tangent. So, yeah.
So to close us out,
Yes.
tell us one what a conscious hustler means to you, and then also where we can find you on the internet
Sure.
for visiting your horses or to get some big data done.
You got it. You got it.
Stay connected.
So I think that in defining being a conscious hustler, you got to remember, you got to rest as much as you grind. You
Mhm.
have to ebb and flow. You can't always be on and be doing all the things for everybody. You have to have a level of self prioritization, and you have to take care of yourself first. That involves rest.
Mhm.
So, moving towards your goals at a pace that works for you, sometimes it might be faster, sometimes it might be slower. That's how I define a conscious hustle. Because
Yes.
sometimes that forward movement will come from rest in the stop, and that is the best advice I had. Because once I learned that, and that like stuck in my head, it wasn't just an idea I heard, but I could put it into play. Whole world changed, and that's just it. Ranch is roseranch.co. It's everything's there. And I'm Macala, Macala, rose.com for strategy and analytics. And I am always happy to talk to fellow creators or business people of color on just about any topic in the world, because Lord knows I've been around for, girl, what is it, like 2.5 decades in this thing? So let's do it.
Listen, we got time. We put some skin in that game, okay? I
Oh,
love
yeah.
it. Michaela, thank you so much for joining us. And we are excited to have you back at some point as we continue to grow in our podcast journey together. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay, that's it. Thank you for listening to the Conscious Hustler podcast. If you haven't done so already, please like and subscribe to this channel and feel free to reach out. I would love to hear from you. You can do so on LinkedIn or on Instagram. Just send me a DM. But until next time, keep listening, keep reaching out. We are in this together. And I hope you have a great rest of your week.